And President Donald Trump tweeting his apparent admiration of the slaveholding Confederacy last week. This tweet, sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart with the removal of our beautiful statues and monuments. You can't change history, but you can learn from it. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson. Who's next? Washington, Jefferson? So foolish. For the second time in a week, the president equated the founders of our country, Washington and Jefferson, with two traitors who wanted to destroy it, Lee and Jackson, and sending a message to white supremacists that they heard very clearly that tells them he is on their side. Joining us this morning for a reaction to the president's comments and what Tuesday might look like, with activists Heather Hamill, founder and executive director of Justice That Works, Petra Falcone, of Promise, Arizona, and Reverend Reginald Walton of Phillips Memorial CME Church and advisor to Black Lives Matter. Welcome to you all. Heather, I'll start with you. When you read that tweet, heard the president's comments, what were you thinking?
I mean, so some of my initial thoughts are, he had talked about, well, what's next, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. And my first thoughts were, why are we celebrating men who owned slaves at all, including George Washington, including Thomas Jefferson? Why are these values that we still continue to uphold? Why do we still continue to uplift these men who perpetrated genocide and held slaves?
So you don't think even Washington or Jefferson should be honored?
I don't think we should be celebrating white supremacists. And let's be honest, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were white supremacists.
Petra.
After Charlottesville, what he should be talking about is how to bring healing to a community that has gone through a very traumatic episode like Charlottesville, and he should be talking about unity and love and compassion, yet that's not what comes out of his mouth. And what comes out of his mouth is this continued hate and bigotry and just this division that just isn't a leader.
And in the last week, we have seen two monuments. All the focus lately has been on the monuments, Confederate monuments in Arizona. We've seen two monuments defaced. Reverend Walton, is there a right way to go about getting rid of those monuments for the people who want that to happen?
Well, thank you for having me, Brom. Secondly, we are thankful that attention is being paid to these monuments now. There is a process, and we would hope that Governor Ducey would use his influence to at least speak out against supporting these monuments. He has doubled down, and what we have now is that attention is paid to these monuments, and the eventual removal of these monuments will happen. They have to be addressed. The vandalism is not something that we desire. However, now that it has happened, we have to address, do we leave these monuments which stand for slavery, which stand for hatred, or do we just continue to just go on as it's normal? We're normalizing slavery. We're normalizing white supremacy. We're normalizing this bad behavior. And going back to President Trump's tweets, this is a continuation of what he has done. He has sown these seeds of white supremacy, of racism, and his people, his supporters, his base is responding.
Okay, so say you're talking to a Republican, and the polls show they don't agree with that. A majority do not agree. They think these monuments represent history, period. How do you make that argument? How do you persuade somebody that they represent more than that?
Because you go to the actual historical documents. If you look at the secession articles of each of the Confederate states, each one of them say to a state that they were seceding from the Union to protect the peculiar institution of slavery. And so to honor the Confederacy, which in and of itself was traitorous, understand that. We're honoring traitors to this country, and we're normalizing white supremacy. We're normalizing slavery. Robert E. Lee himself said that he desired not to put up monuments. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's what the general of Confederate forces said. And here we are, twisting his words, twisting history. I believe that if we would accurately look at historical documents and accurately look at what was done, then we would come back and have a real understanding that this was not right.
And yes, I agree with what Reverend is saying about a process, because what happens when you bring people together to talk, then you're going to talk about what's important to us as a nation and what are our values and what are those priorities that we need to address so that we can move forward together as a country rather than moving where we're going, a very, very divided country.
So you're saying there's really no leadership on this issue?
No,
at all at the state or federal levels. It's just a kind of discussion that just
reaction.
That's almost out of control. Joe Arpaio, what would a pardon mean in Arizona?
I mean, if President Trump were to pardon Joe Arpaio, he would essentially be saying, one, that everything that Joe Arpaio did was okay, that the terrorism that he unleashed onto migrant communities was okay, that racial profiling was okay, which wouldn't be surprising because he seems to endorse white supremacists all the time, but it would be another affirmation of him saying, yeah, white supremacy is okay. And
the reaction among Latino activists, many I've spoken to have been very skeptical, cynical that Arpaio might even be found guilty or even go to jail. But if this happens, then what?
A pardon means that you're forgiving somebody. And in this case, the president is talking about forgiving a criminal his sins. And what we would say is that why isn't the president as forgiving for those individuals who've been coming to this country to work hard, to contribute, to raise a family, to live their dreams, get away from violence and poverty, which I'm talking about immigrants. Why isn't the president willing to give them a pardon, administrative relief, or some kind of pathway so that they can make right their stay here in the United States? That's what we were saying.
And yet you know his rally on Tuesday is going to be about the exact opposite.
Well, it is, but the point is that he's talking about pardoning a criminal. He called immigrants criminals, and why isn't he talking about the same kind of pardon for those individuals?
All right. When we come back, what the protests on Tuesday might look like. Stay